Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Today we step into the 2026 landscape of global financial warfare, where the lines between state aid and covert influence have completely dissolved. To understand why a prime minister might suddenly pivot on a trade deal or why a general remains silent during a civil uprising, we must look at the foundation laid decades ago. We are entering a world where the most powerful weapon in the agency's arsenal wasn't a silenced pistol, but a Swiss bank account. During the 1950s and 60s, the CIA realized that ideology was fickle, but greed was a constant. They developed a standardized global system to map the financial desires of world leaders and fulfill them in exchange for policy shifts, military secrets, and political stability. Imagine a world where a nation's entire cabinet is on a monthly payroll from a foreign intelligence service. No shots are fired, no coups are plotted. The government simply belongs to the highest bidder. This was the cold, calculated reality of the agency's financial co-option initiative. This was Project KUDICE. How did this project get its name? The cryptonym KUDICE follows the agency's diagraph system, and the CIA's internal organizational structure. The KU prefix was specifically assigned to the Office of Communications and Financial Logistics branches during the early Cold War. The suffix dice was chosen as a cynical reference to the gamble of political loyalty. It represented the agency's belief that every foreign official was a roll of the dice that could be influenced if the stakes, the financial incentives, were high enough. It signaled a move away from ideological persuasion towards a pay-to-play model of international relations. KUDICE was the agency's ledger for the world's most powerful people. The project was categorized as a financial action program overseen by the CIA's Directorate of Plans to ensure that money flowed silently to key global influencers. A quote from a declassified 1953 budget hearing: "It is often cheaper to buy a leader than it is to overthrow one." End quote. KUDICE utilized ghost payroll systems where salaries were deposited into offshore accounts for officials in Western Europe, the Middle East, and Latin America. The project pioneered the use of education trust, paying for the Ivy League educations of the children of foreign dictators as a long-term soft bribe. A quote from Miles Copeland, former CIA officer: "We weren't just giving them money, we were giving them a lifestyle that they couldn't afford on a government salary, making them permanently dependent on our generosity." End quote. Records indicate that KUDICE maintained a sensitivity index, ranking foreign officials by their likelihood to accept a bribe based on their personal debts and gambling habits. The project utilized front corporations such as import-export firms to pay consulting fees to government ministers for information that was already public, providing a legal cover for the graft. Logs confirm the use of Veblen goods, luxury watches, high-end cars, and rare art as gifts of state that were actually targeted bribes. KUDICE worked in tandem with the Treasury Department to ensure that black budget funds could be laundered through international banking systems without triggering audits. Internal memos describe the retirement package protocol, where assets were promised a luxurious life in the United States if their government was eventually overthrown. Technical logs confirm the development of non-traceable transfer methods using encrypted telex codes to move funds between shell companies in Panama and the Bahamas. Documentation reveals that KUDICE assets included several high-ranking members of the Italian Christian Democratic Party to prevent a communist electoral victory. The project utilized lifestyle subsidies, paying for the maintenance of private yachts and villas for Middle Eastern monarchs. Reports describe the Bagman route, a series of couriers who hand-delivered cash in suitcases to officials in countries with primitive banking systems. The program developed conflict of interest mapping to identify which business deals would most benefit a target's family members. Records show that KUDICE operatives were trained in forensic accounting to ensure that the assets weren't stealing more money than they were authorized to take. Agency researchers identified that immediate cash gratification was more effective for junior officers, while long-term wealth management worked better for senior statesmen. The operation successfully kept King Hussein of Jordan on a secret monthly stipend for over 20 years. Internal CIA memos confirm that KUDICE protocols included blackmail buffers, ensuring the agency had proof of the bribe to prevent the asset from ever switching sides. The project utilized scholarship fronts to recruit the next generation of foreign leaders while they were still students in the U.S. Documentation proves that the agency utilized the Castle Bank and Trust in the Caribbean to mask the origin of KUDICE payments. Logs mention the use of debt relief operations where the agency would secretly buy up the personal gambling debts of an official to gain total leverage. The program influenced the outcome of several elections in the Philippines by funding the travel expenses of pro-Western candidates. Records indicate that KUDICE was one of the primary methods used to secure landing rights for U.S. military aircraft in neutral nations. Technical logs describe the double ledger, a system where one set of books showed legitimate foreign aid while the second tracked the secret bribes. The agency maintained a jewelry vault in Frankfurt used to provide untraceable assets for bribes in Eastern Europe. A quote from a declassified 1961 internal evaluation. Money is the only language that requires no translator in the world of intelligence. End quote. Documentation shows that KUDICE operatives often posed as international bank auditors to gain access to the financial records of agents in targets. The project developed tax shelter incentives for foreign officials who agreed to store their wealth in U.S.-controlled banks. Logs confirm that some KUDICE payments were made in the form of strategic commodities, like oil or grain during times of national shortage. The program proved that economic co-option was significantly less risky than paramilitary intervention for maintaining regional influence. Internal reports describe the golden handcuffs, a tactic where the bribe was so large that the official could never explain its origin, forcing them to remain loyal to the CIA. Project records confirm that KUDICE funds were used to pay for the private medical treatments of foreign leaders in prestigious American hospitals to build personal debt. The agency utilized the IM Fund in Japan to influence post-war political development through massive secret subsidies. A quote from a declassified 1955 financial audit, "The return on investment for KUDICE outperforms any other operational category in the directorate." End quote. KUDICE operatives manipulated foreign exchange markets to create artificial currency devaluations, making the agency's dollar-based bribes even more powerful. The project maintained safe deposit grids in Zurich, allowing assets to collect physical gold without entering a bank. Documentation reveals the use of philanthropic foundations as a primary conduit for moving large sums of KUDICE money into South American social programs. The agency paid the entire salary of several heads of intelligence in allied nations to ensure total information sharing. Records show KUDICE money was used to purchase entire television and radio networks in the Middle East to control the narrative. The project utilized ghost real estate transactions where the agency bought property from an official at 10 times its actual market value. Internal memos describe the use of academic grants to pay off influential intellectuals who shaped foreign public opinion. A quote from a declassified 1968 memorandum: "Financial co-option is the most civilized form of warfare we possess." End quote. KUDICE provided security upgrades for foreign palaces, which allowed the agency to bug the very buildings they were paid to protect. The program used blank check authority for field station chiefs during times of immediate political crisis to outbid Soviet rivals. Documentation confirms that KUDICE money helped fund the 1953 Iranian counter-protests through the distribution of physical cash to street organizers. The project utilized import licenses for high-demand Western goods as a form of non-cash bribery for the families of military officers. Logs show that the agency paid for the wedding of a prominent African leader's daughter as a way to secure a mining concession. The agency maintained a dark reserve of foreign currencies to avoid the paper trail of converting U.S. dollars in local markets. Internal reports show KUDICE funds were diverted to pay for the legal defense of assets caught in domestic corruption scandals. The project used industrial subsidies to keep pro-Western labor unions afloat in Europe and in Latin America. Records show that the CIA used KUDICE funds to gift a private plane to a Caribbean president to ensure his loyalty during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The program established special withdrawal rights for assets at specific American bank branches globally. When we look at the declassified KUDICE files, some of the most profound redactions occur in documents with titles such as Transnational Banking Integration and Digital Currency Transition. That file contains the most extensive blackouts in the history of the Office of Finance, particularly under the B3 exemption, which protects specific financial methods. Why is the agency hiding the modern evolution of the bribe? If you want to hear a story that actually happened but sounds like a fever dream, look into the Golden-Handshake Bank in Australia. While a real bank with that name collapsed in 1980, the rumor mill among former spooks is that the Golden-Handshake was the primary KUDICE front for the entire Pacific Rim. The speculation is that the redacted portions of the ledger files cover the bank's role in funneling millions to corrupt Ferdinand Marcos while laundering heroin money to keep the operation self-funding. This isn't just a theory, it is a confirmed diplomatic disaster. In 1960, a CIA agent was caught trying to bribe a Singaporean intelligence officer with $3.3 million to report on state activities. Lee Kuan Yew famously revealed this in 1965, claiming the U.S. later offered him $10 million in economic aid to keep quiet. The gossip in intelligence circles is that the redacted KU-94 files detail dozens of other Lee Kuan Yew moments that didn't go public because the targets actually took the money. There's a persistent theory about the Moscow payouts. Since the declassified files stop at the mid-80s, researchers speculate the redacted sections cover the massive influx of physical cash sent to Boris Yeltsin and his inner circle during the 1990s. The rumor is that the CIA functionally bought the transition of the Soviet economy to ensure American corporations got first pick of the resources. A theory supported by the sudden unexplained wealth of many Russian oligarchs who had previous ties to the agency fronts. Was KUDICE a success? Tactically, it was a total market capture. It allowed the agency to control foreign policy for pennies on the dollar compared to the cost of a war. Strategically, it was another masterstroke. It proved that financial infiltration created a more stable and predictable type of loyalty than ideological fervor ever could. The project was a success because it turned global capitalism into a tool of the state. It successfully created a world where the agency was the silent partner in dozens of foreign governments. It demonstrated that the most effective way to win a heart is through the wallet. The program successfully birthed the modern economic statecraft doctrine, where sanctions and bribes are used with surgical precision. It was a success that fundamentally altered the way the agency views international law, treating it as a hurdle to be jumped with a large enough check. Furthermore, it proved that greed is the most reliable human emotion in the high-stress world of politics. The success of KUDICE is measured by the sheer number of governments that remain functionally aligned with Washington despite public rhetoric to the contrary. It turned the globe into a boardroom where the agency always holds the majority of shares. Ultimately, KUDICE was a success because it ensured that even when the U.S. lost a battle, they still owned the generals on both sides. It proved that a well-placed deposit is more durable than a treaty. It established a global veto power that relies on the balance sheet rather than the bayonet. As far as technological and operational breakthroughs go, the Golden-Handshake has quite a few, such as shell company architecture. The front corporation techniques of KUDICE are the direct ancestors of dark money networks used in political campaigns globally. Digital money laundering. The non-traceable transfer methods developed for the project led to current blockchain routing used by intelligence agencies to fund clandestine ops. Financial dependency modeling, the sensitivity index of the 1960s, has evolved into predictive economic leverage AI, which identifies which world leaders are more susceptible to financial pressure during a crisis. And offshore banking integration. The use of Swiss and Caribbean accounts in the 1950s led to the global tax haven grid, which provides the infrastructure for off-the-books state funding. KUDICE reminds us that in the game of nations, principle is often just a placeholder for a price. In 2026, when a country suddenly shifts its voting pattern at the UN, or a dictator buys a fleet of jets he doesn't need, remember the Golden-Handshake. The agency understood that the best way to control a person isn't to break their will, but to fulfill their desires. You are living in a world where the global economy is a series of paywalls, and the agency has the master key. The invisible hand of the market is often wearing a CIA ring. The ledger is never closed. It just gets more complex. We are all just decimal points in a balance sheet that was written in the shadows long before we were born. Trust is a currency that the agency knows how to devalue at will. Every global transaction is a potential signature on a secret contract you will never see. The world's wealth is the agency's playground, and we are just the audience for the game. Your own mortgage or credit score might be an infinitesimal line item in a broader strategy of regional stabilization. The very concept of national sovereignty is frequently just a veneer over a deep-seated financial obligation. Thanks for listening. Watch your wallet. And remember, if you can't see the price tag, you might be the one being sold. Join us next time as we examine Pablo. In the heat of Project PB's success, the agency relied on a single indispensable asset to bridge the gap between Washington and the Guatemalan rebels. We'll uncover the life and operations of Pablo, the early radio operator who became the heartbeat of the 1954 coup. This asset, designated as a field communications linchpin, proved that one man with a radio can change the course of a continent. Join us next time for the voice of the coup. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.